Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Call to Adventure pod with me, George B. Next week, I'll be off on the intro to ski touring trip in Chamonix, which is going to be epic. I've been looking forward to this one for ages, and we'll basically just be learning everything that we need to go out on our own hut-to-hut trips. So lots about avalanche training, transceivers, glacier travel, skinning up, all that good stuff. So I'll take loads of snaps and some videos. And if you're keen, you can follow that on our socials, Call to Adventure Official on Insta and Call to Adventure on YouTube. If you like the look of it and you want to book on, unfortunately, there aren't any spaces left for 2022, but we'll be putting on some dates for 2023. So get in touch, head over to calltoadventure.uk if that floats your boat. But now on to today's pod. So today we're chatting with Moose Mutlow. Moose probably has one of the most diverse backgrounds of any of the guests that we've had on so far. When I was doing a bit of research for this, I was pretty impressed at just how many pies he's got his fingers in. So here are a few of the highlights. So Moose has been part of search and rescue in national parks for nearly 20 years. From 2002, he's been a member and senior trainer of the Yosemite Search and Rescue. He's worked as an outdoor instructor, a fishery officer, social worker, bar manager, and principal at an elite sporting academy. As if that wasn't enough, Moose is a nationally recognized family liaison trainer, officer trainer, and swiftwater rescue practitioner. He's more than 2,000 days of outdoor instruction under his belt, and he's also the author of 2 books, When Accidents Happen and Searching. For his full-time job now, though, he project manages the construction of a $52 million school for environmental science in Yosemite. So I'm sure you'll agree, one hell of a resume. So without further ado, Moose, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on the show. It's fun to be talking to someone back in the old country.
Yeah, definitely. We were having a little bit of a chat beforehand. So you live out, so you're obviously working in Yosemite, but you grew up here, right? So how long were you back in Blighty for before you fled to fresh pastures?
I grew up in Birmingham, northern Birmingham, and around 18, I started traveling, and then went backwards and forwards with college. I was down in the southwest at Plymouth, and then at Bristol. And then pretty much didn't come back, just kept moving between Australia, Southern Africa, and Europe, and then ended up in the United States.
Very cool. Yeah, you've got a really interesting accent that's like a bit of everything. Like when you said Birmingham, you sounded a little bit Brummy, but then it's like generally Aussie and like a few North American twangs. So real good mix.
They call it Mid-Atlantic, actually. That I'll have Brits here who will meet me and be like, "You're not English," and Aussies are like, "Well, you Kiwi," and South African will be like, "What's going on there?" And it's Mid-Atlantic. It has no identity. It's just out in the middle of the ocean.
Oh, okay, I like that. Mid-Atlantic, very cool. Well, Moose, normally we kick off with some quick-fire questions that either listeners send in or just some quick-fire questions that I come up with. But today we're going to try something different, and this might be an absolute train wreck, but we're going to go for it. So I have these cards, and there's loads of different questions on them, and I'm going to pick some randomly. And these are just kind of very, very random. So some of them to do with culture, art, all sorts of weird stuff. So we're going to give it a go. I'm going to pick out some random ones. We'll just do them fairly quickly. Sound good?
Okay, great.
So question 1 is, what music has influenced your attitude to life?
Anything by Elgar, because it just stirs you. I like music that hits you at the chord. And then Midnight Oil's blend of progressive music with activism. That's the thing that I was really stirred by back in '88.
That was a tremendous answer. It feels like we rehearsed this beforehand, but I assure you that was off the cuff. So what type? You said it's progressive. Like, is there anything that I'll know that it sounds a bit like?
Beds Are Burning is like it was their biggest hit, and it talked about Aboriginal land rights and the idea that the first people, the indigenous people, had lost so much. And that's the story about wildland. It's the story about conservation. Is we talk a lot about animals, we talk a lot about forests. There were people living there, and quite often they're removed from that landscape. And then we go, "Oh, isn't this great?" But those cultures have lived in harmony with that wildlife for thousands of years, and a part of the system.
Mm.
And I like the fact that the writers in Midnight Oil were unafraid to tackle something that's very, very hard in a way that people from other countries could actually, it resonated with them.
Really cool. I'm glad that question came up, actually. I'm going to take a listen after the show. Okay, number 2. When do you feel shy?
Oh, at any party. I'm a very gregarious person who likes a good story, but I'm a total wallflower. And I would just move off to the darkest corner and just sort of sit there and then hope that the social tide will wash somebody up next to me that I can engage with. A lot of my job right now is I have to be very forward and talk with contractors and negotiate things. And when I have an opportunity to just shut down, I'll become introverted.
Well, I'm going to ask you for some of your best stories later, ones that you mentioned you like telling a good story. So we'll delve into those. Last one. Are you good at saying you're sorry?
Oh, I can be better. I think I can always be better. There's saying sorry and meaning it is about letting go and being able to listen to the other person. And sometimes something can be so egregious that I can't let go, and it takes time. So it's a practice. I think we assume that you can say those words and everything's better, but there's a much deeper emotional aspect of it that you can harbor stuff. And as you get older, I think you realize it's not worth it, and you work through those things.
Yeah, it's kind of part of the maturing process of life, isn't it? Like when you realize that you can let go of those things, and then it doesn't aid you to hold on to them. I can't remember what it is, that there's a Buddhist saying about something like not forgiving people is a bit like trying to burn them with a coal that you're holding. I've done a terrible job and really paraphrased that. Maybe you know it, but you kind of know what I mean. It's somebody will be listening to that just like, you idiot. That is not what it says at all. But it's something similar. And the point is that, you might hold on to this thing, but it's really doing you a lot more damage than it's doing the person that you're holding it against. So yeah, it's an interesting one, but certainly easier said than done.
I actually apologized to an employer once, probably 15 years after an event had happened. And I'd been totally out of line. And I apologized to this person. And it was great because they just looked at me and went, I have no recollection of that incident. And I had held on to it for 15 years. And I was sitting in their car apologizing, being like, it was so unfair. And they literally had they didn't register at all. And I carried that for 15 years. And they had successfully just moved on because it was nothing.
There we go. That was the perfect illustration of what I butchered, what I was trying to get at. So, yeah. So, Moosh, you obviously have spent kind of your life in the outdoors. How did you get into it? So you mentioned that you grew up here. And then, so yeah, what was your kind of like journey into the outdoors?
So, well, we had a garden. We had a big garden when I was growing up, and lots of places to play in that garden and let your imagination run wild. And then we were right next to a place called Sutton Park, which is one of the largest protected parklands in Britain. And it had lakes and places to ride your bikes and rhododendrons and forest. And it was a place that we grew up playing as kids. And so you had that introduction really early to being around water or to open space. And then I was in the Cub Scouts, and I learned how to cook and camp. And then as it just kept going, there was a moment I was at survival camp up in the northwest of Scotland, and found out that you could have a career in the outdoors. I met these people who were actually instructors, and a flashbulb really went off at that point. And I realized that's kind of where I wanted to go, was to be always in the outdoors. It was a good introduction. Once you have some level of mentorship, like with your parents, who say, "Oh, you need to be outside," that makes it a lot easier. And we didn't have technology, so there wasn't the distraction of a digital reality. You had real reality, and I feel very fortunate to have had that.
Yes, it's really interesting now, like coming of the age of having kids, and I'm quite. I guess, adamant about letting my kids have a upbringing that is kind of in the real world, and I'm I think it's about treading that balance. But I do think that a lot of kids miss out on the best part of my kind of childhood, growing up being outside all the time, playing with other people, like really experiencing nature and being able to just go and play. And yeah, I was young before mobile phones, so I didn't have that. I think it's difficult because you don't want your kid to be the only one, or kids to be the only ones that don't have access to, technology, and then the weird kids in school. So I do know some people, some old colleagues who sent their kids to school where there was kind of like all the parents had agreed, and there were school rules where none of the kids would have a mobile till they're 12, for example. And then I don't think they even had to then, but it's like, and they didn't use computers before then. So I think that's a really good way of getting around it, because then they're not kind of ostracized, but you also can't nerf the world for your children either. So it's a really, I think it's a difficult and interesting question, but it feels like they will miss out on the best part of being young. Maybe it's just my view, but what do you think, Moose?
I think you embrace technology because I think it brings it can bring wonderful review and analysis and data collection. It's just figuring out the best avenue for that, because kids naturally inquire and they have wonder and they have imagination, and if you can figure out a way that they're seeing a bug and they're recording where it is, and then they're using a search to see what the bug is, and then they feed into a national database of, oh, this is the first time it's seen this year because we've got climate change and it's coming out in February instead of April. That makes technology really relevant to the outdoors. But to fight it and to ignore it means you're actually setting your kids up for being 18 and stepping into a technology world that they're not prepared for. And I think everybody's trying to figure out what the balance is.
Yeah.
I like the idea with young people of saying, if you in Instagram, are you taking a picture of you, or are you taking the thing you're seeing? And quite often we fill the view with them. And actually, we have to get them to flip the camera and take the view of the thing that's fascinating. What's fascinating isn't them. The view of the cliffs or the river or the animal, that's fascinating. And that's mentorship. And I've said it a couple of times, the idea that you help to guide people in their discovery of how to use something.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a difficult needle to thread, because it's a bit like anything, isn't it? Technology is just a tool. It's like a knife, can be used to cut a birthday cake or end somebody's life. So it's not that the technology is inherently bad. It's becoming increasingly difficult to tread that line well, when there's things that are purposefully engineered to be highly addictive, and they're already massive. So you're fighting it. I think if people are going to use technology platforms, I mean, it's never really, there's some people that it doesn't really work on. I don't find Instagram addictive at all. I can do about 2 minutes and then I can't stay on it any longer. But it must just be, for most people, they find it very addictive and the algorithm works and it keeps them on it. So it's not even just that we're using this tool that's kind of neutral. It's that a lot of it has been optimized by some very smart people and behavioral specialists and behavioral psychologists to make it purposefully addictive. And we know that it's not productive, and it leads to a lot of there's a great documentary, The Social Dilemma. I don't know, did you ever see that one? Yeah, did a brilliant job. Really good expose on it. But it's a difficult question, and I don't think there are any easy answers. But I mean,
but an easier answer is, what social media and those pieces fulfill is a void. Whether it's community, genuine experience, connection, the outdoors, if it's appropriately offered, can fill that void for a lot of people, because it becomes interesting, it becomes fulfilling, it becomes rewarding, and you do it with like-minded people. It's about opening up experiences to a point where people have the confidence to step in and put their phones away.
Yeah, I love that.
It's just a measure of society that we're disconnected from that world, and we've gone to this connection in digital. We need to flip it and get back in touch with being outside and being safe, and kids having playgrounds that aren't shut down for liability reasons, and landscapes that are designed to enhance play, not stop people from playing. There are societal changes that have to happen.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love that, and we'll move on. But one last thing that I've got to say, some technology that does look really cool is the Soloist in VR. Alex Honnold's new film. Renan Ozturk's made it, and I mean, I've just talked about how we need real experiences and get away from technology, but that looks incredible. The experience looks so much more real, because most of us will never free solo anything, and rightly so. But to see what it must be like, and the additional kind of depth that you would get from looking around and having a VR monitor on and being able to see what it's really like to solo some of these huge walls, must be incredible. I'm really looking forward to seeing that.
And the scale of what they're doing as athletes, I don't do well with height. Yosemite is world renowned for massive bits of granite, and I climbed a little bit. I cragged some. I did alpine routes, but drop me off the edge of one of these big drops, and you got 2,500 feet looming below you, and you're stuck on a little rope, and you're doing a rescue training. I am not interested in that. That level of exposure gives me the willies. I'm not a happy person.
I think that's very normal, right? Where what do they say? We're born with fear of falling and loud noises, and being dangled off something very, very high, like 1,000 meters, is you're unnatural if you're kind of fine with that. And Alex Honnold is probably that real outlier, with only a couple of other people out one side, but it looks incredible. If people are interested, there's also a non-VR version where Renan Ozturk films the making of it. That's really good. It's made by Red Bull, 4-part miniseries. So go and check that out. It's called The Soloist. So Moose, we talked about kind of growing up and then getting into the outdoors, but then how did you get into the search and rescue side of things?
So just working in outdoor ed, like the Lake District and in North Wales, you end up seeing accidents or being around accidents with just people out on the fells or out in the mountains. And so you have that exposure with a balanced team to help supplement search and rescue. And then when I came to the States, we got integrated more into the county search and rescue, set up as Outward Bound instructors in North Carolina, and did a lot of technical carryouts and raises and working around vertical incidents. And finally ended up in Yosemite National Park, or in the national park system in the US. And once you're in there, there is amazing opportunity. You get to do a lot of stuff if you say yes. And really early on in Yosemite, I started to have my skills, particularly in swift water, as something that I could teach in and around. And it just tracked me into a multi-decade role within the search and rescue team.
Very cool. So, I mean, I would love to work in search and rescue one day. I think it seems like a really fascinating job. What's it actually like? I mean, the idea of it from the outside sounds amazing. Get to spend all your time outside, doing a very kind of exciting and meaningful job. Is it really like that? What's the actual experience like of working in SAR?
So it depends. Like when I used to be on call living in the valley, where you have a little pager and you just wait for this thing to go off and you do your job. You're just doing whatever job you do. Like I work for a nonprofit in environmental education. And then the pager goes off and you run down to the SAR cache and you get dispatched out. It's really exciting. I loved it. I loved the sort of running out and lights and sirens and grabbing gear and running up the trail. That was really fun. And then it's sort of got a bit more senior. Now I just get called in for specific things, particularly swiftwater rescue recoverers, and working with incident command and family liaison work, and working with families affected by an accident. But it's a real adrenaline rush. And the thing I love about search and rescue is in a bureaucratic world or whatever we deal with, there's all this complexity that's going on, and in search and rescue, there's one thing you have to do. Like, you're completely focused on helping someone. And I love the way everybody sucks in on that. So the person getting the pizza, the person doing the logistics with the helicopter, the person driving, the person you're all on the same goal. And then you complete it and you leave and you've done this thing. And I love that part of it. And the fact that it's very ordinary people at times doing something extraordinary. But you can help on search and rescue on so many levels. If you can bake a really good cake, you can help because that's a fundraising piece. If you know how to do social media, please replace the 6-year-old currently posting because they're just putting pictures up of cats. Like that idea, you can all contribute is really important. And it doesn't have to be out on the fell in your uniform in zero visibility, helping somebody out of a car because they made a bad decision going over the top of the pass. There's places for everybody. And because so many teams are volunteer, they need that injection of new volunteers.
Yeah, that's really interesting and something that I haven't really thought that much about, the kind of ancillary services that go along with it. So yeah, I think that might pique some people's interest. If you do want to be a kind of actual mountain rescue, though, what kind of path would you recommend people follow? Like, how do you get in? What skills do you need?
Well, you've got to be a good practitioner. The more you've been on the water or on the cliff or in the cave, the more useful you are. If you've done everything within the context of a search and rescue training and you haven't built out your own experience, I think you're limited in what you can offer because it's always seen in the search and rescue context. And actually, it's going out and having your own adventures, which builds the real risk management and the intuitive skills. So I encourage people not necessarily to chase a certification, but just chase their own adventure, to go out there and do a really long hike or go out and do some class 2 boating or go and explore a cave with a local caving group that is more of a social event than a certification. The only certificate I say to people go and get, and in the United States, is kind of the most valued, is some level of first aid, like a wilderness first responder, which I think is a 40-hour class. Or we have a wilderness emergency medical technician, which is a month-long program. Those actually gives you good skills to help when you're dealing with somebody who's down and you're doing compressions on the trail and trying to run the AED. That's one that the most valuable certificate I ever got was that. But everything else, it's experience, because that's what you rely on to make good intuitive decisions.
Yeah. I would love to do the wilderness first aid course, actually. Do you know what it's called in the UK?
I think there's a wilderness first responder in the UK and there's wilderness advanced first aid. And you look at the length of the course, like an 8-day course is kind of the responder, and the 4 days the advanced first aid. And I ended up writing ambulance, and the reason I got through the ambulance qualification was because of my 8-day wilderness first responder, because it taught me triage, so figuring out who's got the most injury, what can I do, and it taught me really good patient care. And that's your, if you can make a connection with a patient who's injured and have them have confidence in you, your ability to manage them through a rescue is much greater. They need to know that when you're starting to pump them full of drugs and they look at you and they go, is this going to make a difference? You're like, it makes a difference to 90% of the people because morphine has a really good effect on most people on pain management. But they might be that person it doesn't work on, and you need to figure out what your option is going forward after that.
So you've obviously seen lots of things go wrong in the outdoors. What things do tend to go wrong, and what should people be aware of when they're going out and about?
I think people overestimate their ability and underestimate the challenge. I think that's quite often where it goes wrong.
Story of my life.
They've looked at this thing on the TV and they're like, I'm going to give that a go. That looks great, and it is great until it goes wrong. And I think that it's the idea of cascade effect. It's very little things early on that add up, quite often are the cause of the injury. So you might, for us in Yosemite, people come from sea level and they come up to 4,000 feet and then they try to go to 7,000 and 8,000 feet in less than 24 hours. And they wonder why they're feeling weak and lightheaded. And it's a combination of not getting enough sleep, not acclimatizing, and then becoming dehydrated. So it's really simple things go from either completing the hike or being helicoptered out. And then there's just people, because they haven't had the exposure to the outdoors, don't necessarily think through the consequences of if they fall in the river, what's going to happen. They've reached down to touch the water because it was snow a few hours ago, and it's just pumping, and it's a great location for a photograph. And they slip in, and they're gone because they're in a class 6 water. It's snow melt. They went straight underwater. They took a really big hit that knocked all of the air out of them, and they're drowned in 30 seconds and pinned, and we get them out 2 weeks later. And they would have no concept that what they did was dangerous because they've been so divorced from that outdoor exposure.
Yeah. So, I think it's really interesting to see this trend. I think more people are getting into the outdoors now, which is amazing. Maybe partly, who knows how much, like due to kind of social media and people wanting to get out there, and also just other types of media as well, popularizing. For example, climbing's become a lot more mainstream, a lot more popular, and see more and more people getting out. And even just hiking. Lockdown, I think, was probably a bit of a spur back here in the UK anyway, for a lot of people going to Snowdonia and doing Ben Nevis. And we've just unfortunately had some more fatalities last week on Ben Nevis. I think 3 fatalities in 2 different events. And a lot of people sleep on the mountains in the UK because they're not very high, right? 1,300 meters. It's and that for Ben Nevis, and that's kind of our highest one. And people are watching 14 peaks and people going up to 8,848 meters and thinking like, wow, this is a walk in the park. And it can be, a lot of the time it is walking up, but it's knowing that variability and how quickly weather changes, and that hypothermia is really the big thing that you've got to be careful of here. Because and kind of weather changes and visibility as well. So I think your advice kind of or your observation around not overestimating your abilities and also not underestimating the objective is certainly something to keep in mind, even with what can seem like a very, very doable small objective right here in the UK.
And I think it's also important when people are out there as users, they're all constituents for these places. Long term, they're going to be the voices that say these places have worth. If you want to preserve the Peak District, you need people to be voting to say, yeah, we need to have strong protections for our national parks. And so sometimes there's a rush to judgment on when people have been unlucky or they made poor decisions. Or you see somebody on the trail struggling and you choose not to do anything because we want to hang back a little bit. Sometimes it needs us to speak up and be like, and essentially set to guide people, to help people. And I don't think we should be shy about that up on the mountains. It's somebody can be belligerent and a bit off key. You go, oh, that person's kind of being rude. Actually, they've essentially got the start of hypothermia. They've started to be a bit irrational and dangerous, and they need a hand. And I think our natural British Reserve holds us back and doesn't necessarily get involved. Whereas in the surf line, when you're in water, it's really obvious when people are in trouble. And think of all the people who rush in to help without any question. Boom, they go in and help. There's something about that terrestrial piece, because we aren't struggling for breath, that actually allows us to hang back a bit. In water, people are fast to try and help and quite often get themselves in trouble. But that's where we talk more about swimming and making sure that swimming pools still exist in every community, not just in rich communities, that everybody has equal access to be safe. There's no reason why any child in the UK is not in a position to learn how to swim or to float. It's simply politics and economics that mean that they don't have that opportunity, and that's obscene. No child should drown. It's preventable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We had also, I think, record number of fatalities from cold water swimming this year. A lot of people getting into that, but again, it's really fun. It's exciting. There's something way more special about swimming in cold water. But again, you can't sleep on it if you haven't done the training. I think the big thing that's often missed is that we see people who do incredible objectives and achievements, but what we don't see is like the years and years of training and adaptation. And if you see Wim Hof climbing the highest mountain in Czech Republic in his underpants, and then you think, well, if he's doing that, I could definitely like stand outside in some snow and go in for 2 minutes. But he's had 30 years of doing that madness, and that's I think what we kind of miss from maybe the social or the online life versus in person, where you would perhaps have more of a chance to meet that person, hear a bit more of their background, and all that good stuff. So I think all that to say, get out there on adventures, but just don't bite off more than you can chew.
And I think when we look at frivolous challenge, people doing stuff with less or comedic value, quite often, as you said, they've got a load of experience behind them to be able to do that. And that 99% of the people don't have it out there. And there's a seriousness in the outdoors. Like when you've sat with somebody and you've told them their child is dead, everything becomes very serious. And if it's because of a terrible tragedy and XYZ happened, there's some explanation there. But if they were simply doing something because they had a few beers inside them and they were doing something incredibly dangerous, that frivolous approach is what cost them, and the families will never get over that. It'll always feel like a waste.
Do you have training in how to deliver that news to people?
Well, I give the trainings now. It's something that's learned. It's learned through experience. So I've dealt with 60 deaths in the national park system in the last 10 plus years, and I've done notifications in a quarter of those probably. And you talk to a lot of people who've been around emergency services, and you do a bunch of reading. The internet's fantastic. And you go in with a script that you're willing to be flexible on depending on someone's reaction. But there's no way to sugarcoat a loss. There's no way to say, oh, your cat's on the roof. We tried everything to get the cat off the roof. We had the fire brigade come, and you go to this long, extensive thing about the cat, but the cat just fell off the roof and died. No matter how you spin it, the same outcome happens. When you're talking about a person, you've got to get to that point really quickly so people know exactly what's going on. So there's no hope. You're coming in with a cold reality that's empathetic and compassionate.
So to backtrack for 1 second, so this is part of your work as a family liaison officer, right? But I meant specifically in search and rescue. Is that part of the training that people have? And then can you talk about, I hadn't heard the term family liaison officer before, so can you talk a bit about what that is and what work you kind of specialize in there?
So the family liaison officer is the incident commander's direct representative to the family involved in a rescue, recovery, or search. And you interface directly with the most connected next of kin and inform them what's going on, figure out how to give information the way they can process it when they're in crisis, and you're shepherding them through the challenge of either loss or the unknown. And this all falls under the incident command system, which is an international hierarchical way of responding to accidents. And the family liaison officer is increasingly used in our jurisdiction because it removes the emotional challenge that the people trying to respond to the incident. They could just focus on the incident, and I deal with the emotional challenge of the family. So they feel listened to, respected, and they get timely information, and they're never confused. And I've done that work probably for more than 15 years.
How do you find that work impacts you emotionally? Because it seems like it would be incredibly emotionally draining to be dealing with that on a long-term basis.
So about 3 years in, I went a bit crazy. and emotionally went off the deep end because I did 7 or 8 deaths in a really fast rotation, and a couple of them were young, and it starts to build up. So now it's recognized that we see this it's called the stress continuum, and the idea of exposure to trauma over a short period of time or long period of time has an accumulative effect, and you end up in a position in which you're unable to deal with complexity. You get to a point where I had a pretty bad stress reaction where I had opened the refrigerator and there was so much choice in the refrigerator that I couldn't make a decision what to put on a sandwich. So I would shut the refrigerator and go hungry because I couldn't deal with that level of complexity. That's trauma. And so for a lot of family liaison officers, we're really aware of trauma with family and with peers and ourselves, and we work to facilitate conversations that put us in a healthier place continually. You talk with people continually in your team.
Mm. So do you have like internal counseling then, or how do you take the lid off the pressure cooker when you've dealt with a lot of that?
So there's something that was there's a group over here called the Responder Alliance that's just launched something called 333, which is a way to approach trauma and process trauma with first responders, and it looks at 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, and has a series of questionnaires that you fill out, and they're very easy. And it just looks at where you are on what's called the stress continuum. You're either performing or you're injured or compromised. And it's a peer tool that you can recognize how others are doing and how you're doing, and then you can be referred up to a higher level of care. And the keeping the stiff upper lip and denying this thing's happening is part of the problem, because we have a culture that says that's weakness, and it isn't. It's a human reaction. It's good to feel emotion when someone's traumatized, because while it shouldn't get in the way of you doing your job, it's not a weakness. It's you being human. And so we work a lot with individuals making sure they're making healthy choices. So if you see someone who's continually drinking straight after an incident, that's probably a problem. And if every single one of your activities on a social level is alcohol based, that's a problem, because you're compensating. And it's a lot of what we try to do in the intensity search and rescue is de-escalate, so come off of that adrenaline high and actually get to a place where you know you're safe. We call it hyper arousal, where you're just ready to go, ready to go, ready to go, ready to go. Because at hyper arousal, there's a point where you just crash, and that's where you have dysfunctional relationships, you lose your job, you start having addiction, you have an unhealthy lifestyle. All of those things add up, and then you're dead at 52 with a chronic heart attack, because you've been carrying this trauma, the impact physiologically for the last 25, 30 years.
Are there any other tactics that you use for, other than kind of talking to others? Like, how do you deal with that stress kind of practically?
So you identify where you are in the sort of green and ready sort of setup. Over here, I just held up a card that said green ready, and you see all the healthy things you do. So I know I'm being healthy if I'm laughing a lot, and if I've gone on the water in my boat and I've just brained out for 30 minutes, just going up and down paddling in a pool, or just going across an eddy line for 30 minutes, that's my mental reset. That's where I just become obsessed with the bow wave and my forward stroke, and I lose myself in the thing I love. Or it's bike riding. So you identify what you do, and you can kind of see when you need a reset, because you used to do those things. You used to go and find fresh powder on the back runs and shoot the trees, and now you don't bother. Or I used to do this run in the evenings, and now I don't bother. That's a sign of you not dealing with complexity. So you have a bottom line that recognizes where you're being healthy. So for me, if I'm eating regularly, I'm exercising every day, I'm getting on the water 3 times a week, I'm laughing with my friends, and I'm regularly checking in with these guys I went on expedition with 30 years ago, that I'm in a healthy place. It's when I withdraw, lie in bed, close the curtains, and cry, I don't want to get to that position again.
And if somebody does get there, how do you build them back up?
Professional care, because one of the things is it's easy to think you have the skills to help someone process, but actually therapists and counselors are there for a reason. And so we for our search and rescue team, we have access to counselors and therapists for people to process really involved, macabre events in a healthy way. Because in trying to fix as an amateur, you quite often break unintentionally. And we used to do something that was a stress management piece where they would come in for an hour and you talk about the sensations of a body recovery. And then after an hour, the facilitators would stand up and be like, "Oh, everybody's done. Everybody's been healed. I'm going to head back to my job." And that was far from the truth. You'd actually surfaced all this trauma. And then I'd go home and crack a beer and wonder what was going to do next. It's you, as a peer, you have a responsibility to recognize where your team's at and people around you. And as an individual, you need to be in a position to recognize where you're at because you have a bottom line understanding of where you are to being healthy. And your friends, like if I've done something that's a really disturbing mission, I talk to my family. I call around 2 or 3 friends I have, and the next day I step back and I just go and do something I love, like mountain biking. I'll go for a really big mountain bike ride, or I'll go and grab the rescue board and I'll go surfing. And it's finding the time to process. In a fast world, to slow down is the thing that heals.
Yeah, I think that, and I can see the kind of crossovers, not just from obviously it's extreme stress, but a lot of people are struggling with similar symptoms or in similar positions, but not because they've seen stressful things on search and rescue. But I think that advice will be powerful for a lot of people who've maybe found themselves in a ditch or a difficult situation. So yeah, I think kind of seeking professional help or helping others do that is a really good strategy to deal with it.
And I think recognizing that the definition of trauma I like is trauma stops us from living the life we want to live. And everybody's been through COVID, and we've all had different impacts of that, and it's a traumatic experience. And one person's trauma isn't more valuable than your trauma. You all have a level of trauma, and there are things that you're not alone, and that you have options. And talking to someone is the start, recognizing where you're at.
Yeah. So, Moose, to switch gears a little bit, you mentioned at the start that you, at a party, you might like to be the fly on the wall, see what's going on, and hope that somebody brushes up next to you who's kind of fairly interesting and has a lot in common with you, but that you also like to tell some stories. So, what are is there a story that you really like to tell, or a couple of stories that you like to tell? Can be about anything.
I was in the Kalahari teaching in a school in the 90s, and I had a Land Rover at the time, and I had a group of other expats came to the school, and we had a really fun party where I probably wasn't sort of on the wall, so to speak. And at some point, we decided to invent sand skiing out the back of a Land Rover. And so we got these large pieces of roofing metal and fashioned a ski. And then we tied a shovel to the back of the Land Rover as well. And then we drove through the Kalahari on a moonlit night and up and down the road surfing behind the vehicle. And we would have these big crashes and we'd laugh. And it was amazing because the starlight in the southern hemisphere was so much brighter, and the desert was beautiful, and we're on this sand road, and we get up the next day and all of us are really banged up. So we've got horrible sand rashes from crashing because we hadn't really thought about it. So we're out in shorts. People had impacted sand in their ears, and people had like eyes were messed up, and it was just chaos. It was just everybody was messed up. And one of the locals came over and said what was going on last night. And we said, "Oh, we invented this sport. It's absolutely fantastic." And we all went out and explained it to him. And I remember the look on the guy's face because he was like, he looked at us and there's an international look on someone's face that when they're looking at people explaining something that isn't a good idea, that says you're all jackasses. And he had that look. And I realized that we've been having a good time, but we kept the village up, and we've been disruptive, and we were just out of it. We were just not thinking through being polite. And I've thought about that moment a lot. Is that when you have shenanigans, when you have like good-natured shenanigans, it shouldn't affect other people. It should be purely your little group that's affected. And that's one of my reference stories for making what I would call good bad decisions.
Do you have any advice on how to make better decisions?
Yes, have bad experiences. Paul Petzold talked about it the whole time. Bad experiences lead to good judgment. And I think the idea is if you have someone at 18 who's been so closeted that when they step out for the first time as an adult on their own, they're going to make massive mistakes because they have no experience to base their good decision making on. So it's going to be a lot of falling really violently. And I think you build risk management early in kids, and you let them fall and you let them fail, and not everybody gets a trophy. And you build this compendium of experience so that as young adults, they start making really good informed decisions. And at 18, they make really good balanced risk assessment in decisions around their life. So they're not scared of risk. They embrace it and use it appropriately.
More good advice for getting out and about. So, Moose, you've also written a couple of books, When Accident Happen and Searching. So Searching is your most recent one. So Searching, Finding Purpose, Laughter and Distraction Through Search and Rescue. So who might enjoy Searching, and what's the big overarching story?
So Searching is a series of search and rescue stories from working in the United States. And it looks a lot about the impact of being out on protracted searches and the harder stuff of dealing with recovery. And interspersed in there are ridiculous stories. For me, one day I was diving on recovering a black bear carcass out of the river in order to unsnap a radio collar off it, and the ridiculousness of me diving on this dead bear and what happens around that. And I think the book's for people who have been around the outdoors and maybe have some exposure to search and rescue, or people are curious about what happens out on search and rescue. It's an honest account of a very ordinary person who gets to do some really cool stuff. And America is an interesting place in that I don't have mountain leadership, I don't have BCU, I don't have ski instruction, and yet I've been a patroller, I've been a high-level guide, I've guided in the Arctic, I've done trips up on Denali. It's their experience talks very loudly in the US. And as a result, you get to drive ambulances, you get to go out on recoveries, you get to go up in helicopters, because there's this openness that I didn't find necessarily anywhere else in the world. And that's what I've been benefited from. That's been a wonderful, wonderful journey.
Yeah, well, I'll look forward to digging in. And if listeners fancy taking a read, where can they pick it up?
You can pick it up at any bookshop now because it's digital. If you look at on Kindle or on Amazon, Moose Mutlow on my author page, you can see both the books. And I encourage people to go to their local bookshop and say, hey, how do I get this? And they'll figure out a way to get you a copy.
Brilliant. Great stuff. Well, we'll also link to it in the show notes as well. So, Moose, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been amazing to chat. I'd love to catch up again at some point in the future and hear more about your wild and wonderful stories out on search and rescue and search and out and about in the outdoors.
Well, thank you. I'd love to come back on, and stay safe and have a good outdoor time in Chamonix, a fantastic destination. And enjoy our winters while we have them. If you don't enjoy them, think about preserving them.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I'm really excited. First time to Chamonix. So yeah, it's going to be great. But we do need to hold on to these winters, and they're certainly getting more tricky. Everyone may have seen the new IPCC report. If you haven't seen it, it's very depressing, but it's probably good to go and read it. It's about 3,000 pages long. Just read the abstract. But yeah, we certainly need to do something about it. So responsible travel, Call to Adventure's mission, happier people and a healthier planet. We need to do both parts of those to be able to keep the world ripe for adventuring. So, Moose, thanks again for coming on the show. Listeners, thank you for tuning in. So until next time, thanks very much. Bye-bye.